Welcome to the Versus Men's podcast, where we're having real conversations and stories on faith, manhood, relationships, culture, and everything else in between. These conversations are tough, but we're honestly doing them because we have to become the men of God that He's called us to be. You aren't the only one who's trying to figure out your faith, your marriage, or you're struggling with an addiction. That's why this podcast exists. So thanks for listening, and if you enjoy this content, like, subscribe, and send it to a friend who needs it. Thanks for joining. Hey guys, welcome to the Versus Men's podcast. I am super excited to have Matty Mullins, frontman of Memphis May Fire in Berlin. And this is going to be a great episode, guys, because so much of what he has done publicly and through his music, it just showcases a lot of the same themes and ideas that we're trying to do at Versus. And so we'll put some links in the description for his music. You're going to want to check that out because I think many of you guys are going to be into it. But Matty, thanks for being here, man.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah, thanks for having me.
And so you guys are now, 7 studio albums in for Memphis May Fire? 2 solo records for you?
Yeah, working on album number 8 for the band right now.
Oh, dude, that's my first question is, okay, so you're obviously home.
Yep.
So you're when will you be heading back out on tour? You're working on new music?
Yep, working on new music. We'll be back out April. We're doing a co-headliner with Asking Alexandria, bringing out The Word Alive and a new band called Nerve, which would be cool. And that tour it's an exciting run. It's, like 4 kind of Warped Tour bands.
Yeah.
And I think people are excited about that. So it's gonna do well. Tickets are already selling pretty awesome.
I was gonna say, I haven't seen Asking Alexandria since Warped.
Yeah.
So, this is a long time ago. And dude, I was bummed when we first moved here, it was that year and a half ago. You guys were playing with Parkway Drive.
Yeah.
And of course you guys had to pick Valentine's Day to play at Marathon Works, man. And I it was a bummer because I was like, I can ask my wife, Kristen, hey, you want to go to, a metal show on Valentine's Day? I knew I was going to get that answer.
Yeah.
But man, I heard it was a great show.
It was killer, man. Yeah. Marathon's a lot of fun.
Matty, like I already said, one of the reasons why I wanted you on was because man, you've been modeling so much of what we do at Versus is helping guys be vulnerable. And this last album that you guys had, Remade in Misery, man, there's topics on there that, one, it's just a front to back great album. And again, guys, if you haven't listened to Memphis May Fire, we'll throw some songs in the description from YouTube and you can check them out. I think to so many people's surprise, I grew up listening to heavy music. And so, and a large, I think, reason why I got into it was just because heavier music tends to have really contemplative lyrics, whether that's socially or introspectively. And I think you guys definitely follow that route too. How is that process for you when you're writing an album? Are you thinking through this is just what I'm going through? What's the creative process for you?
It's a little bit of everything. A lot of times an instrumental will kind of fuel an emotion that's already there that is kind of hiding, For me, we've always written music the same. We've always started, our guitar player, Kellen, bass, drums, guitar, full finished instrumental demo. And then I will write vocals to that. And then the instrumental will change to complement the vocal. But, I often feel inspired just by the music that he writes, but also I'm a human that's experiencing so much just in a day-to-day basis. And that's fuel for me. That's inspiration for me. I think it's funny because you can go and sit out in front of a sunset, looking at the ocean and feel zero inspiration, or you can be in the frozen aisle at Kroger and be like, I have a song idea, So it doesn't come at the moments you think it's going to, unless that just magically happens. But I think there's always something to write about. Writer's block, I think, is a myth. You are experiencing something as a human right now. It's just up to you whether you want to be honest about it, whether you want to write about it or not. So, and it's cool, in heavy music, there's no off limits topics, right? In Christian music, the term they use is vertical. Everything has to be vertical, which I'm a huge fan of. I obviously have a CCM side project and grew up on CCM. It's a huge part of my life. But in this world of music, there's no one's telling you what it has to be. There's no rules.
Yeah, in many ways, it feels like the guys who are out there doing this, who are from a Christian faith background, man, they're actually, it takes more investment to actually say these things because they don't have to.
Yeah. Right.
And so I think there's a level of genuineness and even wrestling through like the tensions of faith. And I mean, there's themes that even in Remade in Misery that like we can get into that I think they demonstrate the realities of the Christian life so well. Self-doubt, doubt through suffering. What did that album title mean to you personally?
So the title Remade in Misery is all about how we cannot, as human beings, become stronger, become better versions of ourselves, become the people that we're supposed to be without going through the hardest moments in life, right? I heard this thing once that said, everybody thinks that life is about being out on the beach, holding a margarita, and just enjoying the sunshine. It's like, well, life really is about when you're out in the middle of the ocean and the ship is sinking and you're holding on by one last plank of wood. It's in that moment that you grow. It's in that moment that you have to make decisions and changes, and self-realization. So in my life, I feel like more often than not, the times that I've been remade has been in misery, in miserable seasons. And that was kind of all encompassing of the whole record, kind of told the story of the whole record.
Yeah. It was from start to back. It was great. And that's where, when I was going through seminary, I remember when someone said, who worked there, we're not asking if you guys are struggling with porn or other addictions. We're just assuming it. And so that's why we're offering like, hey, before you graduate here, we've got sexual addiction recovery classes. We're here for you guys.
So
and dude,
cool, man.
As embarrassing as it was, I was like, all right, sign me up, because
so awesome.
Like if you don't own where you're at in your own story, like I wasn't even engaged yet. And it's like, nah, there's things in our lives that we have to, if you don't take it as a challenge, if you don't realize that this addiction is leading you to misery, and if you're not seeing it through like, hey, where's the positive?
Yeah.
Especially with your faith of like, Jesus is not sitting there condemning you in a way that's like, he's surprised by your addiction or he's surprised by whatever misery you're going through. It's like, how do you offer it to him?
Yeah.
How do you be real and vulnerable with him so that you actually meet like the love of God?
Yeah.
So when we were going through that album and I was looking through the lyrics, it was speaking heavy. Do you ever find it that ironic though, that like the heavier music tends to touch on so many more of the life struggles that we're going through, and in some ways they bring it to the surface, which in some Christian bubbles, like they don't ever get there? And that's not meant to be a loaded question.
No. I think, musically it caters to that, right? Yeah. Which is great because I think people need an outlet for those emotions when in most spaces of life you're encouraged to either keep it on the DL.
Yeah, stuff it down,
especially as men, right?
Yeah.
Like, like just go out, do your job, support your family. And if you're going through something, take it up with God. Yeah. And it's like, okay, well, I'm trying that. Yeah. I think taking it up with God means taking it up with other men that God puts in your path, and men that can speak into and have also experienced the things that you're going through. But yeah, man, I mean, heavy music is a place where a lot of people fit in that don't fit in anywhere else. And that was me. When I was in high school, I had no friends, but I would go to a local show and I would belong, and not only would I belong, but there was all these topics of heartbreak and struggle, anxiety, depression, self-loathing that were being discussed. And it was so wild how in those environments, it doesn't feel like you're reinforcing those feelings. It feels like you're being seen, and that is the first step of healing. I always felt like, growing up listening to CCM, I always had this like overwhelming weight to offer hope and positivity in every song that I would write. So, we would write songs that were dark, but I would kind of always try to twist it towards the end to make it hopeful. And it wasn't until I had my own experience with anxiety and depression that I realized that a pat on the back and a good message, somebody being like, it's going to be okay, like meant nothing. What you need is to know that you're not alone in what you're dealing with. Sometimes the most hopeful thing that you can offer somebody is to say, this sucks.
One thing that, going back to like, hey, sharing with other men what you're going through, it's like confession of, you confess what you're going through to God. Absolutely. But then if you don't have guys around you to confess what you're going through, it is a very difficult journey.
Oh
And then
yeah.
with heavier music, man, you got people singing out lyrics of their heartbreak, of the tensions in their soul. That in some ways, I mean, there's people who would argue that like there's a form of worship going on at that show. It's what's the source of that worship in many ways. And I understand that tension that some people would say like, hey, if they're not a believer, and some people get skeptical of heavy music, but there's an emotional aspect that's brought out in the energy of these shows.
Well, it's impossible for there not to be
Yeah.
because God created music.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what the genre is, when melodies and chords are put together to make something, God orchestrated our ability to do that. He created music so that we could feel, so we could experience and enter into another dimension. That's what music does, which is why worship is so powerful. But simultaneously, it's why heavy metal is so powerful.
Exactly.
And of course that can be used for evil. People can use the Bible for evil. They can use it to manipulate people and to confuse people and to control people. Same with music. But at the end of the day, God created it. So whatever space you're in, if you walk into a concert and you're needing a message of maybe it's not vertical, maybe it's, I am pretty sure I'm going crazy and I don't know anybody else that is feeling that way. And then all of a sudden someone tells a story. Maybe they say something through lyric that you weren't able to say yourself. You couldn't piece the words together yourself. In that moment when you don't feel alone anymore, that's when you feel human. That's when you feel like healing is possible. You watch somebody else having gone through the same thing and they didn't end their life. So maybe you don't have to either. So much power in that.
What was it? So when did you get into, you say you grew up with learning worship music. So when did that transition come for you from going from, clean singing to like practicing growls in your room or whatever it was in high school? Or, how did you get into it?
Yeah. I would say freshman year of high school was, the boom of Tooth and Nail, Solid State era of music. So I was very passionate about a faith-based message, regardless of what genre of music I was listening to. And that whole Tooth and Nail, Solid State era was
The best.
It was great, man. Yeah. It's when a Christian message made its way into rock and metal, right? And so those bands, when I was freshman in high school, went out and I think first show I ever saw in a venue like that, first kind of show like that I ever saw was Showbread. And it was so awesome. And that just opened the doors. There was a band that was opening for them called Dead Poetic. And then, I went from that to, found out about Terminal and Anne Berlin and Norma Jean. And, it's just like, it was electric. It was new. It was fresh. It was exciting. It was dangerous. It was all of the things that like a teenager needs to feel alive. And so, yeah, that was my introductory into that. Like, as far as like real heavy music, the first album that really got me into, or that I connected with, I would say it would be Norma Jean, Bless the Martyr, Kiss the Child. Yeah.
And then, so when did you start singing? Like getting involved in Memphis May Fire? Was that around 08?
Well, I grew up in a really musical household. So
Okay.
I my first time singing on stage was when I was 6. And I wasn't even singing. My brother played in a grunge band and he asked me to get on stage and yell, Jesus is cool and he's in my head over and over again. So my very first time ever on stage was 6 years old yelling, Jesus is cool and he's in my head. So yeah, that was always a part of my life. I had a bunch of local bands. I was blessed to play with a lot of musicians that were older than me in my hometown. There was a level of respect. I don't know why they allowed me to be in the picture, but they did. Some of the bands that I grew up listening to locally were joining my bands by the time I was 16. And so, we were touring regionally and had started multiple bands and put out albums. And then I had a buddy that had gone to California for a while and experienced life outside of Spokane, Washington. That's where I'm from. And was like, hey, there's a much bigger world out there. And if you really want to succeed in music, you need to kind of get out of your comfort zone. There was a band called Memphis May Fire that had just started, and they were doing auditions for a vocalist on MySpace.
MySpace.
Yeah, they're out of Dallas. And I sent one after the fact, found out that it was the 180th or something that they had gotten. For whatever reason, clicked. They flew me down and we rehearsed. There's so much more to that story, but that's how it all started. I got married when I was 18, joined the band when I was 19. So my wife and I were married for a year, lived in Spokane, and then packed up our whole lives and moved to Dallas at 19. Yeah.
That's a lot of life change at a very
That's
young
crazy. Yeah.
age. I mean,
I'd never even been to Texas and then drove down and moved in there, especially coming from Washington, you know. Texas is very brown. It's just like beige and flat, you know?
so what was that like? I mean, because you're starting your early 20s. You know, Memphis May Fire's taken off. You guys probably got on Warped Tour?
2012.
2012
was our first Warped, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, you're like in your early 20s. Like, obviously, you are married, but like, what's it like to grow up on the road, man, as with other young band members? That's a lot of like influence. It's a lot of freedom. That's a lot of temptation all at the same time. I mean, like, there has to be amazing, hilarious moments, you know, but there also has to be really tough moments too.
Yeah. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. Being 19, that kind of like freedom and influence. We were making no money, but it's like the freedom of living in a van with 4 other dudes your age and driving overnight for 8 hours every night and being in a different city every day. I wish I would have had more people in my life that were grounding me. Definitely made mistakes like anybody else, and I really wish I knew then what I know now is the best way that I can say.
That's what I was just going to ask you, is like the things you were probably working through on a faith basis, like spiritually.
Yeah.
Like, do you look back during that era and say like, man, like just like you said, like, I wish I knew this about God. I wish I knew this about myself.
Oh yeah.
My faith. And like what's
not even, I mean, like from a faith-based perspective, of course, but also just like a maturity level. You know, like there was so much life that I hadn't experienced yet, but I felt like I was on top of the world.
Yeah.
And when people are listening to your music and supporting your music and coming out and telling you that, like, you know, you had an impact on their life and everything, at 19, it's really easy to believe that, you know? And such an honor to have been a part of people's stories through music from the age of 19. But I also wish I could go back and just shake that kid, you know, and just be like, listen, nothing is about you.
Thinking through so many of those bands through the Solid State era, through like many of these, and like this isn't a surprise to anyone, but like there was many faith Christian bands that were in that scene that then dropped off because there was, hey, I actually don't believe this anymore, stuff like that. Like, how much of the season of life of like gaining success and like the internal wrestling with who they really are outside of like, some of these guys were just leaving home for the first time, that like it was almost an unfair expectation. Like, I mean, because you got to live this.
Yeah, man. I think that in a lot of ways you could even relate it to like a worship leader, right? You know, these bands that were signing to Tooth and Nail Solid State and claiming Christianity, some of them were so young in their faith or weak in their faith, whatever you want to call it, new and didn't fully understand what they were preaching, other than the fact that they're like, there's hope in Jesus and that's awesome and that's cool, right? But then when there's no real foundation to that, it's easy to slip. And also, you can relate it to like a worship leader in the fact that like worship leaders every Sunday for multiple services get on stage and they lead worship whether they are in that heart space or not, and that sucks.
It's a tough thing to do.
To get on stage and to proclaim the goodness of God when nothing in your life reflects the goodness of God according to what you're seeing right in front of you in that season. Family members passing, kids, you know, God forbid, you know, your kid is like deathly sick or whatever. And it's like, well, okay, but like my job is to get up and say God's good. So I'm going to do that. I just wish that in that Tooth and Nail Solid State era, people weren't looking up to people for God. People were looking at people who also needed God. And they're like, when you struggle, you're not falling off. You're being human and I'm here for you. My good friend Jared Wilson took his life. He's a pastor. And he and I had so many conversations about depression. And he was really open to talk about it with friends. But I think that in his workplace, if one day he had all the answers for people struggling with depression, but the next day he was the one struggling with depression, it's so polarizing and you're not allowed to talk about it. because people in power or influence are always being looked to for those answers. That's where everything has failed in Christian culture. It's like, go to your pastor and expect them to be honest because you and your pastor are both going to Jesus, right? And to see leaders as humans who are not going to make mistakes, but as people who are going to make mistakes, but they're in a place of leadership because they have given their life to that task.
Pastors ought to be worship leaders. Our lives ought to be signposts to the gospel.
100%.
Signposts to a good father who will love them unconditionally, who is meeting them in their mess.
Yeah.
And that's a part of the self-examination that I'm only a signpost because I'm not Jesus.
Yeah.
And that's a huge thing. I think sometimes there is that false expectation that like, man, I'm wrestling through my own idols that I'm given to Jesus. And that is something that I think culturally in America, we're just these huge fumblings that is starting to be washed away. But it's at the same time, how do we care for these people? So what was it like, man? I could not imagine as an artist through the pandemic, having your world thrown upside down, plans being halted. What was that like for you?
I think it depends on what you believed. You know, like, I think like the people on the internet that like to embrace negativity, you know, they're like, you're never going to tour again. How does that feel? I never felt that way. Human beings are resilient. This isn't the first pandemic that the human race has gone through. I was like, we'll figure it out. This sucks. People are dying. That's the worst. I had friends who lost their parents, things like that. So I'm not like here to be like, it's not a real, it's not that. It was just like, I knew from the start that like human beings are resilient and music is never going to go away. Financially, like timeline wise, all of those things, of course, were stressful because you touring and selling merchandise on the road and things like that is like how artists like survive. There's a bunch of bands doing live streams and things like that, which is really cool. We decided that if we couldn't tour music and we couldn't be out on the road and like meet our fans and everything that we love to do, then we were going to spend every minute off making the best record of our career. And that's what we did. You know, it's like such a ridiculous jump from what we had done before that to this record because we, you know, they say every artist has their whole life to make their first record. It felt like that again. And there's never again going to be a time in our career where we're given that gift of everything comes to a screeching halt and you have nothing but the music. Usually when you're making a record, you have everything and then also you have the music. It's like all the voices in your ear, all of the tour opportunities, all of the, you know, things that are happening like rapid fire on a day-to-day basis. But like, I didn't, you know, I'd talk to my manager once a week, maybe, you know, our booking agent, like no communication because nothing was happening. So we only had music. And when you only have music, you make the best music.
I mean, did you guys sit there and just rewrite songs? I mean, I'm sure the amount of songs that did not make that album, was that more significant than previous ones or like?
This is crazy. Instrumentally, Kellen has written a billion songs or whatever. I have never once written a song that hasn't made it to a record, ever. Because when I sit down to make a song, I'm not done until I love it. And so it's like, if I chose 10 instrumentals, those 10 that I write to are going to be on the record. For me, it's more so write the song, track the song, rewrite the song, retrack the song, rewrite the song, retrack the song. It's like, you know, lyrically, melodically, for the most part, those things are going to stay once I start. But just like tweaks here and there and like redoing something here and there, I'll do that for like weeks for sure.
How long did it take you to write like Somebody or, you know, make believe? Like, can that happen in like 3 hours?
Somebody took probably 2 hours and 45 minutes to write and then probably an hour to track.
Is that not incredible to think how catchy that song is?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. It's like always the best songs that come together like that. There's a handful of songs on the record that took 3 days and, you know, whatever. But Somebody was the very first song that we wrote on that record. And it was the first song that I decided to bring Cody and my buddy. I was like, hey, let's write this together.
From Wage War?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And we are best friends. We live down the street from each other. We hang out every single day. So like the chemistry in the room was already just wonderful, obviously. And so we sat down to write, and I gave him the melody idea that I had and kind of the topic. And then it was like, boom, 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 done. And it was like every aspect of it was like, I love this. I love this. And it came together really quick. So that's kind of my process now. I'll get an idea together, and then Cody and I'll sit down and finish it because I love him so much.
You talk about iron sharpening iron. You two in the same room. I mean, this applies for guys. I mean, no matter their profession, hang out with people who are really good at the same. Don't be intimidated by people who are really good in your field of work. You know, there's a collaborative element.
There would be so much more success in music if younger musicians realized that it's not about competition, it's about collaboration. If you lay down your pride, if you lay down your percentage of ownership of a song or whatever, and just say, I just want to make great music and I really respect this person, I'd love to work on it with them. It's like, lay that down. Everything else comes after you have great songs. And it has to be a collaboration. I learned that the hard way myself.
Would you say it took that many albums to get to that place?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah. Me and Colin never did any co-writing ever. And it was a pride thing. You know, like I was just like, I know the vision of my band and I want to take it there. But Cody is younger than me. He grew up on Memphis. We're one of his favorite bands. Cool. So when I sit in a room to write with him, I get firsthand perspective of what a Memphis May Fire fan wants.
Dude, audience of one right there.
Ticket. That's the golden ticket, dude. On top of that, incredibly talented human being, obviously. So he the whole thing is really sweet.
How was it to go back to have that record going back out on tour after the pandemic? I mean, those had
first show back, I was like shaking.
Yeah.
I had definitely forgot like what it felt like to be on stage. And it's funny because like all of the panic was like pre-show. And then I walked out on stage, I was like, oh yeah, it's like riding a bike. But the actual like, you know, the rehearsals and then the waiting and our very first show back was for like 15,000 people.
No pressure.
Yeah. At a Rock Fest in Wisconsin, I think. And it was huge. And so I was, you know, like so nervous. Went off without a hitch. It was great. Yeah.
That's all. What's so great about you, Matty, is like not only do your lyrics reflect your faith, the tensions of faith, your own struggles, mental health, but like you openly talk about in interviews, and I love it, man. It's like, how would you say like your influences the way you see the world, like what you're writing about, how you even with your own mental health journey, like how does that frame things for you? And I know that's a large question, so you can take it in any way you want.
No, yeah. I think mental health has become the overarching focal point for Memphis May Fire's songs because it's been the biggest deal in my life, the most transformational thing that's ever happened to me. And I am so lucky to have the sister that I have. Her name's Amy Alexander. She's a therapist and owns and runs a nonprofit called the Refuge Center for Counseling here in Tennessee. And so ever since I was very young, she's my oldest sibling. I'm the youngest. So she's kind of like a second mother. She's always been a place of refuge, no pun intended, for me. And one of the greatest pieces of advice that she's ever given me was, you know, like when I was really, really struggling, I had felt like I had to stay strong because if I didn't, I was going to let my fans down. And she said, you not being honest with your fans is letting your fans down. And at that moment, I was like, okay, well, I have nothing else to lose. I feel like killing myself. I feel physically sick and low. And none of that is in line with my personality, with who I am at heart. You know, I'm so full of joy. And so like, I'm a hope enthusiast. That's like what gets me going is just thinking about like all the cool things that God has in store for life. And that left me in the blink of an eye with one panic attack that led to multiple panic attacks that led to years of depression. But when I got to the point where I couldn't do it any longer, I decided to start being honest. And it was so funny how everything that I thought was going to happen didn't, and everything I never knew could have happened did. such a strong connection with our fans, like instantly, because I was no longer the person that thought they had to be someone to look up to, but I was a person just like them. And I always was, obviously, but to be honest, like that is so important. So at that point, I realized and decided, made a commitment that I will never be quiet about anything mental health related. I'm not an expert. I'm not, I didn't go to school for that, but I have a lot of experience with my own struggle, and how selfish of me to keep any of that private when so many other people are struggling. And so, yeah, it's ever since I had that, I'd gone through that, God has given me countless opportunities with friends and with family and with fans to walk through really dark seasons with people. And it's so precious to, since I've experienced it, to look someone in the eyes and to be able to say, what you're going through doesn't scare me. So you can tell me anything. I'm not afraid of what you're going through. I feel so sad for you because I know how that feels, but I'm not scared of it. So tell me the darkest thing that goes through your head every single day. When you do, that's when healing will start.
Half the battle is realizing you're not alone in it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And especially in Christian culture, in podcasts like this, I like to go all out because I'm not afraid. I have nothing to lose, dude. I am not afraid. Like I talk to Jesus about this every single day, and he knows exactly what I've been through. So having opportunities like this to get on here and talk about my experiences, I love to say things that are controversial that I really believe. And first and foremost, I think that anxiety and depression are extremely over spiritualized in the Christian community. And I really wish I would have known that in early years. Every panic attack and every bout of depression felt demonic. It felt like an attack of the enemy. Now,
there are physiological things going on as well.
Yes. Of course, Satan wants you to feel low so that you resort to things that are outside of what God wants for you. But Satan is not omnipresent. He's not in your bedroom while you're having a panic attack. More than likely, what you are imagining is demonic activity is not. It's panic and depression, anxiety, panic induced feelings that are so powerful that you can physically see figures that seem to be demonic. It wasn't until I realized that I needed to be on SSRIs because my body didn't make enough serotonin, that I realized that God was not punishing me with panic attacks. There were no demons in my apartment hovering over me while I was shaking, convulsing from sheer fear. My dad is a great example of someone who just can't relate. And you can't be upset about that, because if someone hasn't experienced symptoms of panic and like real symptoms of depression, and all they know is that their relationship with Jesus is the end all be all, which is amazing, then their opinion is going to be, oh man, we're going to pray. We're going to be hopeful. We think God's going to intervene here. But you're thinking that God's going to intervene in a certain way where God really is going to intervene through therapy. God's going to intervene through medication. God's going to intervene through the people that he created to create Zoloft, the people that he created, like my sister, to sit in rooms with people who are at the very end of their rope and say, it's not over yet. God uses people, and God uses the church, obviously, but God uses medication too. God uses therapy.
I've done classes at Refuge, and I'm incredibly grateful for it.
Me too.
And in Southern California, my wife and I, of course, it's therapy as maintenance,
Yeah.
and therapy is not a place to only go when you realize things are falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
I recommend therapy for every guy, because you will realize that maybe what you are stuffing down, you've been stuffing it down for far too long that you forgot that it's there.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, what your sister's done at the Refuge, it's been incredible. I'm in debt to them.
Me too.
What would you say, Matty, for you, practices and habits that you've integrated into your life concerning your mental health that you on a daily basis do now that has helped?
So I recommend anybody that's listening to this that deals with any symptoms of anxiety or depression, that you go to Instagram and you follow Michael Norman Official. one of the most brilliant therapists on the face of this planet who has completely dedicated his life and career to symptoms of panic. Unbelievable human being, and has just endless resources. At least starting there to understand panic is so helpful. Panic, and there's two aspects to this. Number one, it's not harmful. When you're panicking, it's physically impossible to pass out, to have a heart attack, or to die, because what's happening is your body is giving you cortisol and adrenaline and everything you need to fight a bear, right? Or to run from a
You're pumped
wolf.
up. Yeah.
So it's like, now, if you're just driving down the road and you get cortisol and you don't need it, panic, it feels terrifying. It feels like you're actually in a fight or flight situation, and you're not. So I'm not downplaying how big and grand and terrifying those moments feel. But the truth is, the more you know about what's happening inside of your body, the more you're able to recognize those symptoms and deny those symptoms. Panic starts with a small bit of anxiety from some sort of distant thought or something that you really weren't paying attention to, which makes you more aware of that, which makes you more anxious, which makes you panic, which makes you more anxious. And it's a vicious cycle over and over again. You don't realize that you're the one that's causing panic, but you are.
There are little things like even writing down every day what you're grateful for.
Journaling's awesome. Yeah. Oh,
okay.
for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, like on a spiritual level, getting to a place where every day you tell God what you're thankful for in your life can change your entire life. Don't get me wrong. But when you are chemically unbalanced and you are chemically battling anxiety and depression, go to therapy, talk to a psychiatrist, see if medication is something that is right for you, and learn every single thing that you can about anxiety, depression, and panic. Learn it all. Study it. Do a deep dive. And then
knowledge is power in this case.
Absolutely. Because when you know that what's happening to you isn't dangerous, that first spark that was distant, that the very first kind of rush that you feel in your body, when that happens, you recognize it and you can deny it.
Transitioning before our last rapid fire questions here.
Yeah.
This is a heavy one. When you look back at the end of your life, what do you want your legacy to be? What's the sort of like eulogy virtues that you want people to speak about you?
I just want people to know that I am exactly like them, and that I'm thankful for every opportunity I've ever had to share my heart, whether that's through a podcast or through music. If that's touched you in some way, that's awesome. It doesn't mean I have a gift. It means that we're the same. It means that I said something that you felt and made us connected. I guess if I were to have any sort of legacy, I would want it to be that I loved my wife so wholeheartedly and served her to the best of my ability. But yeah, I don't know. I'm just super regular. So it's like, it's
no, that's great, man.
Yeah.
Okay. Rapid fire questions. Well, these will be the last 10 minutes.
Okay.
Favorite movie?
Back to the Future.
Which one?
All three, but the first
Really?
one, obviously. Dude, absolutely. All three of those movies are better than every other movie that's ever been made, period.
There's some fighting words with Indiana Jones in this, man.
Indiana Jones is sweet for sure. But I mean, time travel in general, to me.
Even the third? You're going back to the West?
I loved the third one. I absolutely loved it because I love like the Wild Wild West. And
Okay,
I also love time travel. And I love Michael J. Fox. And I love like the whole thing. Every aspect of that movie was so insanely powerful to me. And if I had to pick a second place, it would be Iron Eagle because I think fighter pilots are the coolest.
Okay. Best food on the tour?
Well, I've been a Taco Bell addict for the majority of my life. When I was young, I had a really tough time in school. And so if I got a report card that was C's or above, my grandparents would take me to Taco Bell. We were really poor, so that was a big treat. So when I went into adulthood, I still mentally see Taco Bell as like a reward, right? But now I just know that I can eat it every day if I want to.
The always delicious Taco Bell.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable, dude. Taco Bell I've always loved, but what I'm trying to do now so that I don't die too early is I'm eating these meals called Fresh and Lean. They're really ripping. They're always fresh, never frozen, like actual like chef curated meals. They're rad. And you just cut a slit in the thing and put it in the microwave for 2 minutes, and then they're awesome. It's really convenient on tour, and it's really the absolute best option because I get off stage at 10:30 or 11 p.m. And if I'm, if I'm eating that late, it probably shouldn't be
moderation
a
is key
cheesy
with
Gordy to
Taco Bell.
crunch. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Favorite venue to play at?
Coco in London.
Okay.
Yes.
Worst moment you've ever had during a show?
A couple years ago, I fell off of a stage in St. Louis, really tall one, and I broke 2 ribs.
Ooh.
it was excruciating. We continued the tour, which was so irresponsible.
Yeah. There's questions in that, but
yeah, dude, it was a lot to it. But yeah, that was, I mean, by far.
Okay, that's the worst. What's the most hilarious moment you've had on stage?
We did a co-headline tour with Yellow Card when we were playing in San Francisco. I walked out on stage and slipped on water and face planted, got back up thinking I had covered for it and that people didn't notice. And then the next day there was this viral GIF of me falling up, like over and over again, and everybody saw it.
Yeah, that's great. Favorite tour you've been a part of?
Man, honestly, probably the run that we did with Breaking Benjamin and Papa Roach. That level of touring is so comfortable, you know? It's so awesome. And so there's nothing to worry about. And then on top of that, everybody in Breaking Ben and everybody in Papa Roach are A+ human beings.
So favorite band yourself to catch live?
It would be a tie. There was 2 bands that were wildly influential to me when I was like 16, 17, both of which I would not be where I'm at today if it wasn't for those bands. Blindside, which I think is one of the coolest live bands of all time. And My American Heart. They're my age. They were already on tour and signed by the time they were 16 years old. So when I was in high school, that was huge motivation to me. I loved their music. Brilliant, even from the age of 16. They did a couple of reunion shows. They're all close friends of mine now, and I got to go to all those reunion shows and actually perform at those shows. Christian from Blindside is the only guest vocalist on my bucket list that we haven't gotten yet, and I will get him. And both those bands live. I saw Blindside at Furnace Fest a year or so ago. They were unbelievable. The My American Heart reunion, 10 years reunion shows for Hiding Inside the Horrible Weather. That album was just like the house front of house guy at Soma, San Diego. And it was one of the most like brilliant sonic things that I've ever experienced. Unreal.
Matty, thank you so much for being on this podcast, man. Well, I would love to do this again. Obviously, you're going to have a very busy next like 8 months, but we'll do this again.
Yeah, dude.
And just thanks so much for all that you do around the city and, man, just for being who you are. So
my pleasure.
Guys, thanks so much for joining us for our Versus Men's podcast featuring Matty Mullins.